Slack head angles, 2.3-inch wide tyres, short stems, wide handlebars, and an Epic without a brain. Now, if you are looking for any more proof that XC riding has changed and XC bikes have changed, then look no further than these two new bikes right here. On my left is the 2021 Specialized Epic, and on my right is the Epic EVO. Now, for the past month, we've been testing these two new bikes, and we've brought them up here to Canberra for a few days of intensive back-to-back testing to really knuckle down on the differences between the two. In this video, we're going to be going into some detail about the new Epic and Epic EVO and what's changed over the previous versions. We're going to be talking about how they ride on the trail, how they compared to each other directly, and ultimately what kind of rider is best suited to each bike. Okie doke, so the first bike we've got here is the 2021 Specialized Epic. Now, at first glance, this bike doesn't look too much different from the previous version, but there's actually a load of small incremental improvements on this bike that add up to a big difference on the trail. Now, first up, of course, it's a full carbon fiber frame. Specialized engineers have managed to chisel away 100 grams off this frame, and that puts it as one of the lightest full suspension frames on the market. Now, despite the weight drop, they have boosted stiffness in the back end. So Specialized says the back end is 15% stiffer laterally, but more crucially, there is less side load on the rear shock, around 30% less. The rear shock itself is also new, and that's all about improving long-term durability. The brain is also new, and Specialized says in the firmest position, the back end of this bike is firmer than the previous Epic, but it also responds faster to bumps as well. Up front, we have the new RockShox SID SL fork. Now, this came out earlier this year. Big improvement over the previous SID, a lot lighter. We've got the new debonair spring in here, significantly more progressive. And in the damper side, of course, we have the position-sensitive brain damper that Specialized and RockShox have developed together. Now, just like the brain shock on the back, you have 5 positions of firmness for the brain setting. In the softest position, it's completely disengaged, so it's nice and soft. So you can tune how firm the platform is with that blue dial on the fork and the black dial on the brain damper on the rear shock. Geometry-wise, there have been some big changes on the new Epic, significantly slacker head angle, 2 degrees slacker in fact, at 67.5 degrees. Now, when many of Specialized competitors are operating around a 69, even 70 degree head angle, this is quite slack in comparison. Of course, we have a reduced offset fork on the SID SL, and Specialized is also running nice wide bars, 760 millimeters wide on our test bike here, and a 70 millimeter stem length on all frame sizes. So a nice progressive front end on this bike. The seat angle has been steepened to 75.5 degrees. The chainstay length sits at 433 millimeters. The big number that stands out though is the bottom bracket height, which has been lowered by 9 millimeters. That is a lot. Now, Specialized can get away with that because of the brain shock on the back. The shock sits a lot higher in its travel. It has that strong, firm platform, and that keeps the pedals away from the ground, so you can get away with the BB sitting closer to the ground to help lower the rider's center of gravity. Now, as far as spec is concerned, the bike that we've been testing for the past month is the absolute top of the pops S-Works model. Ultra premium build kit on this bike. We've got SRAM, Axis wireless shifting, carbon fiber, everything. We have a power meter as stock as well. And we also have the new Roval Control SL wheel set. Big performance enhancer on this bike. This is a brand new carbon fiber race wheel set, sub 1300 grams, incredibly lightweight, but also quite wide. These have a 29 millimeter internal rim width, and that's designed to support 2.3 inch tires front and rear. Now that adds up to a very, very lightweight bike. Our test bike here, which is a medium size, weighed without pedals, is just 9.45 kilograms. Incredibly lightweight. Now, we should mention here that there are obviously more models coming to Australia for 2021. I believe there are 4 complete Epics coming to our shores. If you want information on pricing, specs, geometry, and all of the features on the new Epic, make sure you go to flowmountainbike.com. We've got a handy link in the video description below if you want to know more about the Epic. Now, while there are a lot of exciting improvements on the regular Epic, we think it's the Epic EVO that a lot of you are going to be very interested in. Now we've been riding the Epic EVO for the past month. That is this bike here, and just like the regular Epic, this guy is all new for 2021. Now, Specialized has had the Epic EVO in its lineup for a couple of years, and basically it took the existing Epic, put a bigger 120mm fork on it, bigger tires, a dropper post, and a wider handlebar, and called it done. This new Epic EVO, however, is a full commitment to the concept. So the frame is still very similar to the regular Epic. Indeed, the main frame is identical between the two, but the back end is different. The travel is different as well. We've got a 120mm RockShox SID on the front, and we have a RockShox SID Lux shock on here, delivering 110mm of rear travel. There is no brain to be found on this bike. That is the big difference between the EVO and the regular Epic. This is still a cross-country bike, but it's less of a World Cup level short track cross-country bike and more of a marathon / short travel trail bike even. The geometry is different on the Epic EVO. It's even slacker than the regular Epic. So we have a 66.5 degree head angle on this bike, which for a bike with 110mm rear travel is super slack. The cockpit is actually quite similar, 760mm wide bars. The stem is 10mm shorter, 60mm stem here to quicken up the steering a touch. We also get a more aggressive front tire. That's a ground control 2.3-inch tire on the front, but they do stick with a 2.3-inch fast track on the rear. The bike that we've been testing here is the absolute top of the range S-Works model, but there are several models coming into Australia for 2021. Again, follow that link in the video description below, and there you will see specs, pricing, geometry, and all of the details about the new 2021 Specialized Epic EVO. All right, so we're here with the two Epics, and I've got my pal here, Mick Ross. Cheers.
Cheers, pal.
To a couple of great days of riding here in Canberra.
But before we go any further, Will, the heart of the Epic is its brain. What is the brain? Tell us a bit about it.
The brain and the Epic go hand in hand. Ever since the Epic was launched back in 2002, it featured the brain suspension design, and the original design goal was to basically create a full suspension bike that pedaled like a hardtail, and it was to kind of coax World Cup athletes, you know, national level cross-country hardcore racers off their hardtails onto full suspension bikes, which I think we all know these days are the faster, more comfortable, and dare I say more fun option.
Absolutely.
But here we are, nearly 20 years later, and efficiency is still, you know, a big goal of any cross-country full suspension bike.
Sure.
So the brain's evolved quite a bit on this bike, but at its core, the brain is an inertia valve. And an inertia valve is basically comprised of a cylinder with a brass mass inside it. You have oil coming in from the shock, and the brass mass sits over the ports for the oil to move through. So when it's blocking it, it's basically locked out. When you hit a bump, that brass mass moves inside the cylinder, it dislodges, and it allows the oil to flow past that brass mass through the reservoir into the IFP. So then when you hit a bump, the idea is that the suspension will compress once that brass mass moves. It's basically an automatic lockout. It's probably the easiest way to describe it. The inertia valve can differentiate between rider inputs, you sprinting out of the saddle, and inputs from the trail, you know, hitting a bump, hitting a rock or a root. It's improved a lot over the years. You know, it's pretty clunky when it first came out. And over the years, it's gotten smoother. They've added the brain fade kind of function, which is where, at least on the rear shock, you get oil. Some oil can still pass around the inertia valve. So you will still get shock movement, even with the brain set to the firmest setting. So you'll still get that kind of initial sensitivity, that traction, that comfort. But when you're really pushing on the pedals, it's designed to be nice and firm. I think on that point, this new Epic, we've got an update on the brain damper on the rear shock. So Specialized has actually made it slightly firmer in the firmest position. You do have 5 settings on the brain damper, both on the rear shock and on the fork. So you've got 0 being the softest, 5 being the firmest. And it's worth pointing out as well that in the softest position, in 0, the brain's switched off, basically sends the brain to sleep. There's no brain. And I described that before as being day 3 port to port. You know, you kind of like a couple of days into a multi-day stage race, the body's hurting, you know, you've got a technical stage coming up, and you can just, you can turn the brain damper off on the fork and the rear shock. You've got nice, supple, smooth suspension, well, as much as it can be for a 100mm race bike. But it does disengage the brain completely, so you can do that. Otherwise, then you've got another 4 positions on the fork and rear shock to play around with. And I've personally found that really useful for adapting the suspension for different trail types, and perhaps the difference between you just trail riding with mates versus race day. You can have different settings on there to play around with it. So yeah, so the concept of the Brain is exactly the same as the original Epic.
Multiple improvements over the years.
Significantly improved.
And the Brain over the years has been a polarizing part of these bikes.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I guess it's like the Vegemite of mountain biking. Some people love it, some people hate it, some people just can't get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
But what do people have a gripe with?
Mm-hmm.
What is it about the Brain that is so divisive?
Yeah, sure. So aside from a little bit of extra weight and extra complexity, the big deal. You don't like that. Cut. Okay.
Wait. No, I was sorry.
All right. Yeah. Aside from a bit of extra weight and a little bit of extra complexity, the big defining characteristic that some people really can't deal with is the knocking sensation that you get through the suspension. So basically, when you have that Brain set on anywhere from 1 to 5, whenever you encounter a bump and the shock does give way, that inertia valve does move, you get a knock through the frame. You can feel it through the contact points, right? Through the saddle, pedals, and the grips. Now, originally, I thought this knocking was from the brass mass physically knocking against the cylinder that it sits within, but it's not. It's actually to do with fluid dynamics. It gets a little bit complicated, but it's pretty much, so I'm told, I don't fully understand it, but it's basically when you get a really fast rush of fluid inside the shock. So when that brass mass moves and you get oil moves through really quickly, you get a knock through the oil, and you can actually feel that through the rest of the bike. So as long as this bike has an inertia valve, there's basically no way to get rid of that knocking sensation.
Sure.
And it's a lot better on this bike than it was on the earlier editions of the Epic.
Yeah, it keeps getting better.
It does get better, but that knocking will still be there. So if you've ridden an Epic before, or you're looking at test riding this bike and you feel that sensation and you just can't get your head around it, you're not into it, then you can scrub the Epic off the list, because it's always going to do it. If you can get your head around that knocking sensation,
can you get used to it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can, once you do get used to it, there's a lot of performance advantages.
Absolutely,
that come with that system, for sure.
Totally, yeah. On the Epic, we have here the Brain-equipped Epic, the lean and mean 100mm short cross-country racing machine. What impressed you the most?
Yeah, that's well, there's a lot to be impressed by. It's a very high-end bike.
High-zoot.
Very high-zoot bike. I think for me, the efficiency is huge on this bike. And as we were saying before, it does take a bit to get your head around that knocking sensation from the Brain, and also to play around with the settings. You do need to spend some time trying those firmness settings on the Brain platform. But once you do get past that, the efficiency is incredible. Yeah. It's such a strong platform. The fork is really impressive. So the way the Brain damper works in the fork is a little different to the rear shock. And what they have in there is a position-sensitive damper. It's been updated for the 2021 model. So now you get 15 millimeters of free play, or sag.
Yep.
And regardless of how firm the Brain setting is, that 15 mil is the same.
Feels like a regular fork.
Feels like a regular fork. Yep. Exactly. And the idea is that, say when you're seated pedaling along a fire road with lots of washboard bumps, that's I think a good example. The fork is still responsive. It's still comfortable. Your wrists aren't getting bashed about like it would do if you had a fully locked out fork.
Yeah, right.
But once you hit that 15 millimeter mark, that's when the inertia valve engages. So you get this firm platform once you go through. And with the 5 levels of adjustment, you can tune how firm it is and basically how big the impact needs to be before it will activate the fork. So that 15 mil, it's great. It works exactly as advertised. So you get a little bit of comfort, a little bit of traction, especially when you're not loading the front end, because how much weight you have on the front on the fork definitely defines how it reacts. So when you get up out of the saddle and you're sprinting, you get that really nice firm platform. It's super solid, and it's the same with the rear shock as well, as far as that platform keeping you higher up in the travel. When you're on the gas, you get really good snap out of the corners. We were also discussing that on some of the Majura Pines single track, You've got these kind of like rolly sections, and so it's not necessarily just climbing and fire roads where the brain works.
No.
It also works in technical sections where you want to pump the bike and move it through.
It's highly rewarding. If you're engaging with the terrain and pushing the bike and pumping the bike and catching the backside of rocks and logs, you're just rewarded with rapid pace.
Yeah, it's so fast.
And you feel like you're on fire.
It's so fast. Yeah. And the other thing I like in terms of on technical trails, high speed berms, the fork's amazing because it sits at that 15 mil, sits right up high in its travel, and it sticks. It doesn't dive like a traditional fork that's open.
Yep.
Yeah, because when the fork dives, either when you hit the front brake or you're loading it up through a corner and you're on a steep, your head angle steepens, and everything shifts forward and it all gets kind of tight and sharp. This is really steady.
You just bounce out.
Yeah.
You just holds you up and springboard out of there.
Big time. And I think
it's exciting.
I think that brings me to the other thing that impressed me most about this bike. It's a nice transition, is the geometry in general, but the steering is really, really good. So we mentioned before that Specialized has taken 2 degrees off the head angle, so it's very slack for a race bike, right?
And the previous model had a really good steering.
It did. Yeah. We've both tested the previous version. It's a bike we know well.
It was a huge factor. So they've taken 2 degrees off that again.
67.5 degrees, which
that's trail bike territory.
Yeah, for a lot of brands, that's trail bike territory, exactly. So it keeps it really steady because they've shortened the stem a touch. The steering is, they've quickened up the steering by shortening that stem length, so it's not lazy at all.
No.
And I think because it sits up higher in its travel at the back as well, you get a really nice sharp response out of this bike. The lower bottom bracket too. You can run the bar and the stem a little bit lower because everything's sitting a little bit lower to the ground.
Yep.
As mentioned before, Specialized can get away with that lower BB because of the brain shock, and it just sits that much higher.
Cranked away.
Yeah. So efficiency and steering handling on this bike is so good.
Okay.
Really, really good.
Yeah, marvelous. Well, what are some of the less impressive features of the Epic, in your opinion?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a good question because I've really enjoyed riding this bike and it has impressed me in a lot of ways. I think right now, a big elephant in the room is the price. This S-Works model, which is the absolute top of the range Epic option, $19,000. Now that's a number that's been popping up a lot more lately, but more with e-bikes, right?
High-end e-bikes.
High-end e-bikes. It does have technically a motor in the rear derailleur, but there's no motor helping you pedal. It's an extraordinarily high-end bike. Mind you, this does have the higher end Fact 12M frame. This is the super light frame option. So once you go down to the Pro, you get the Fact 11M carbon frame, which then comes on all the cheaper models. And pricing kicks off, I think, around $6.5 grand for the entry level model. So there are far more accessible models than this. But on the S-Works bike, $19,000 outside of sponsored riders, and I mean, that's a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
Huge amount of money. There's nothing you could possibly upgrade on this bike at all. It's as high end as it possibly gets. And it's light too. It's under 9.5 kilograms without pedals for our medium test bike. That's super light.
Remarkable.
So you're definitely paying for that performance, that's for sure. And I guess the other attribute is the efficient suspension. While it is super responsive, it can be pretty unrelenting. You do get more feedback through the front and through the rear. And you do really need to be on your A game. You need to be attacking the trail. You need to be riding just that little bit faster. The faster you ride and the faster you hit stuff, the quicker the valve opens, the easier it opens. Yeah. So if you're having an off day, it can be a pretty harsh bike to ride.
All right, well, we've talked about the all-out race Epic. Let's talk about the Epic EVO. The Epic that may have gotten in trouble at school, suspended a couple of times, drank their parents' gin, refilled the bottles with water. Welcome to the EVO, the slightly cooler, more comfortable riding bike.
Yeah, you're right. This is the naughty one for sure.
Naughty one, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So as mentioned before, there are some similarities between these two bikes, but I think what impressed me most about the EVO is just how far Specialized is committed to the concept with this bike.
Yeah. It's all in, right?
Yeah, no brain.
No brain.
No brain. Yeah, total commitment, which we love. No brain on the rear. It's got a standard metric eye shock on the back, so there's nothing proprietary about that. Very few proprietary things on this bike in the first place. Threaded bottom bracket. It's got SRAM UDH derailleur hanger, metric eye shock. You can put a normal fork, drop post.
Nothing weird going on?
No, and yeah, we really like that. And you can still fit 2 water bottles inside this frame, just like the regular Epic, because the main frame is the same. The back end is a little different. It's a little stiffer, got a little bit more tire clearance. But yeah, I think what's impressed me most is that the commitment to the concept. So rather than just kind of taking the same bike and tweaking it a bit, this has created a new bike, I think.
And you feel like you get so close to that efficiency because of its, you know, suspension performance, weight, geometry. You get so close to the efficiency of the regular Epic.
Yep.
But without the brain and a slight increase in travel, opens it up to, you know, so much more, right? Totally. Yeah, it's more versatile. Yeah. It's more comfortable.
It's actually lighter. Because you don't have the brain on there. You drop 200 grams or thereabouts. So the claimed frame weight on this with the shock is somewhere around 1,600 grams. It's extraordinarily light.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the brain damper in the fork either. So it goes to the bigger SID fork, which is 120mm travel, 35mm stanchions. There's the regular Charger race day damper. So no brain in the fork either. And that fork is really, really good. In fact, the front end of this bike is great, right? 66.5 degree head angle.
Yes.
It's got that nice burly fork on there. It's plush. You've got a slightly shorter stem, so 60mm stem. The same with the handlebar, 760. But the front of this bike feels solid, right? You know, you feel more confident kind of plowing it into stuff. I think the other thing that impressed me about the Evo is racing comfort is the way I'd kind of describe it, because geometry wise it kind of like suggests, you know, this like big aggressive trail bike. It's not. It's still a cross country bike. It's still very efficient, right? Like even without the brain on the back, this shock, it's either open or locked. You only get 2 positions and there's no remote lockout. So we've been riding it open the whole time. It's fine. Plenty efficient. It's not the same as the brain for sure. You don't get that same sprinting platform when you're really sort of hammering on the bike, but it's plenty efficient. And I think with the more relaxed geometry, the smoother fork, the smoother rear suspension, the fact that you have the dropper post on there, this actually is a really good option. I would choose this for 50k, 100k marathon races, multi-day stage races, where a full-blown race bike for someone like ourselves, who's not necessarily a finely tuned athlete. Well, maybe I speak for myself there. But if you're not one of those kind of people who gets up and does yoga every morning and does interval sessions and, you know, has someone
tuned.
Who can handle being on a race bike for 4 or 5 days in a row, then this is the better option. And it's not that much heavier. It's still under 10 kilos for the bike we've been testing. Granted, it's very high end. It's the S-Works model, but it's only about 400-ish grams heavier than the regular Epic. But it comes with the dropper, the bigger fork, the bigger front tire. You know, it sort of hits all of those main features, right? Yeah. So that's kind of what impressed me about the Evo. I'd say the full commitment from Specialized, the commitment to the concept, and the racing comfort. Don't view this necessarily as like a hardcore technical trail bike. It's still a cross-country bike, and it may indeed be the better cross-country race bike for a lot of people. Yeah.
Great. And then on the flip side, was anything that bugged you or didn't impress you about the Epic EVO?
Yeah. Okay. So I think the same talking point on price has to be mentioned, because it's the same price, the S-Works models, the Epic EVO and the Epic, and it's an extraordinary amount of money, whichever way you look at it. As I said before, there are numerous models coming into Australia, so you don't have to spend $19,000 just to get one of these. You can spend closer to $6,000 to get on an Evo. I won't harp on that too much more. I think the only other thing, I think this bike's really dialed straight up. It's a great build kit. It's a great geometry, the suspension design. If it were my bike, I would probably look at different tires, and that's obviously condition specific and rider specific as well. I'm pretty hard on tyres, even though I'm fairly light. My local trails seem to shred tyres. I'm blaming the trails, not my riding style.
Absolutely.
But I've already put a couple of nicks into the back of this tyre.
Yeah.
The sidewalls are kind of thin. I'd be putting on something that's a bit more robust. And I'm not the biggest fan of the ground control. I'd probably put something with slightly bigger cornering, edging blocks on there. Tyre choice, it's personal preference. So yeah, it's hardly a weakness, but on this bike,
not a big deal though.
No, not at all.
And the question on everyone's fingertips at their keyboards: what would you choose
out of these two bikes?
A lot of people want to know.
That's a really good question, and I'm not going to cop out. I'm going to give you an actual answer, but I will say both bikes really impress me. They impress in different ways, and obviously they're different tools for different jobs, even though they're very close in terms of travel and the frame, parts of the frame are the same and so on. I really like the efficiency from the Brain suspension design. I think this is the best yet from Specialized. And for anyone who's racing at that high level or has aspirations to race at that high level,
there's nothing better.
It's so efficient and there's something addictive about that efficiency and responsiveness under power for sure. But if I had to choose between the two, I pick the Evo. It's more versatile, it's more comfortable, it's more fun. You've got a drop post on there, you've got smoother suspension. It's a really, really good bike. But the thing is, it's still capable of being raced. If you did buy this bike, if you did buy the Evo and you wanted to do racing a bit more seriously, but you didn't want to have to trade it in and buy an Epic and admit that you made the wrong decision. If you had this bike, there's a few things you can do. There's a geometry chip in the lower shock mount, so you can flip that, and that steepens all the angles by 0.5 degree. You could change the tires to something a little bit faster, mainly the front tire. And if you were riding a course where you didn't necessarily need the dropper post, you could save.
Where are they?
There are places in the world and riders who don't need dropper posts. I know it's hard to believe.
Holy moly.
But if you were willing to commit to that, then you could drop a good 300-400 grams by taking off that reverb axis, because it's quite heavy. So there are things you can do to kind of race it up if you wanted to take your racing more seriously. The frame's also remote lockout compatible as well, so there's other things you can do there longer term. But versatility wise, comfort wise, fun, speed, it's the Evo is the more versatile option of the two for sure. Well,
likewise, after riding these bikes for the last few days, I would also choose the Evo out of the two, mainly because of its versatility and ability to ride like a ripper trail bike, as well as a very, very capable multi-day race bike. It'd be my pick. So that brings us to thank you, everybody.
The end. So we need to point out that there's a load more information about both these bikes on the website. We have a news story that'll take you through both the Epic and the Epic EVO, all of the models coming to Australia, pricing, specs, geometry, all the information about what's changed on these new 2021 models compared to the previous version. There's also a review on each bike, and in the reviews I go into agonizing amounts of detail about our experience with testing these two bikes. So if you found anything lacking in this video, follow the link in the video description below. That'll take you through to the reviews. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you give us a big happy thumbs up. Be sure to let us know your thoughts about the new Epics in the comment section below. Ask any questions you've got for us about these two bikes and how they compare to each other. And if you haven't already subscribed to our YouTube channel, do it now, please. We have many, many more videos coming in the near future. We're right in the thick of new bike launch season, so there's lots of secret stuff coming your way soon.
Thank you very much, everybody.
No worries. We'll see you next time.
And thank you, Will.
My pleasure. My pleasure. We hope you enjoyed the video. We'll see you next time. Tooroo. Oh, you've got to do it. You got to do it. Do you want to cut in and beat me to it?
No, that was good.
I was waiting for you to do it as well.
Oh, okay.